Dear students, good morning. We are into the 15th lecture on this course on applied electromagnetics. Actually, we have come to the fag end of developing the skills for mathematical analysis of the vector fields. In this case, electrostatic and magnetic field. Okay, so this is the most important class where we are going to lay out certain conditions for how to determine these fields uniquely. That is the substance of Helmholtz theorem. We'll talk about it to begin with, and then we are going to also talk about the equivalent conditions for a vector function to represent a curleless field or irrotational fields. Similarly, the equivalent conditions for the vector function to represent solenoidal fields. Having said that, we'll also comment on the potentials associated with these curleless fields and also the divergenceless fields. So you must remember that curleless means irrotational. A function will not have any rotation associated with it if the curl of that function vanishes. Okay. Similarly, the function cannot represent a solenoidal field if there is no spread associated with that vector function. So the extent of spread is measured by the divergence. The extent of rotation is measured by the curl of that vector function. So with that in mind, let us discuss about Helmholtz theorem. By now, you are also aware that the Maxwell's equation form the basis, or rather it reflects the entirety of electromagnetics. The four equations, namely the divergence of electrostatic field, the curl of electric field, the divergence of magnetic field, and the curl of magnetic field. These four equations actually is actually representing the entire electromagnetics, and it is not an understatement, it is not an overstatement, it is a fact. Now, having said that, suppose I know the divergence and curl of a vector function. Okay, please pay attention. Suppose I know the divergence and the curl of a vector function like del dot f equal to d, which is the divergence, which is a scalar, and del cross f equal to c, which is a vector function curl operation, cross product operation. So let us say for this vector function f, I know both its divergence and curl. How well can I uniquely determine from this knowing d and c? Okay, how well can I determine f? That is the question. So I am given a number from the divergence. I am also given a vector function which actually is supposed to represent the curl of that vector function. Okay, the vector function c represents the curl of the field function f. How well can I determine this vector f, vector function f? That is the question. There is two equations definitely, but we need to know only the f. Can I determine uniquely? Please understand the word uniquely. That is very, very important. Can I determine f uniquely? Okay, that is the question. Now for consistency, since the curl is nothing but the C that is actually representing del cross F. So by mathematical implication, we know for consistency del dot C must be 0 because divergence of curl of any vector function must be 0. This we have seen in the previous class. So question is, where does this lead to? Can we determine this vector function F uniquely? This word uniquely is very, very important. The answer to that is quite not. We cannot determine uniquely. We may get some function, but it is not unique representation of the F. So there is some more information that is required for the vector function to be determined uniquely. What are those vector functions? So as I told you, the Maxwell's equation is actually divergence of the electric field, curl of the electric field. Okay, so here let us say F represents the electric field, then can we determine the F? That is the question we are leading to. Similarly for the magnetic field, if it represents del dot B and del cross B, if I know the answer, how well can I find B? That is the question we are trying to raise. So Helmholtz theorem says that conditions that it lays out the conditions that is required for uniquely determining the vector field function F. Okay, so that is the substance of Helmholtz theorem. So what is that condition? Why I cannot determine? Because there are many vector functions whose curl and divergence could be 0. Then how will I be able to know F uniquely? So for example, if I have a vector function like F equal to yc ax hat plus xc ay hat plus z xy az hat. Okay, we'll come to that last problem. We will see that both the divergence and the curl of such a vector function is 0. So can I then find F uniquely? Okay, so no, I cannot. Okay, so precisely one should know and supply the boundary conditions for solving the first order differential equations of E and P. Without boundary conditions, we cannot solve. This is the most important thing. Okay, so without knowing the boundary conditions, so what are these boundary conditions? For example, in case of the electrostatic, electric and magnetic fields, the boundary conditions is rather we take the field at a location say infinity must be tending to 0. So if the fields tend to 0, then we can solve these first order differential equations for the divergence and curl of the fields. So that is the main thing. Now think, we are actually going to see conditions like construction of the charge distribution itself is extending to infinity. The charge distribution itself is extending to infinity, in which case how are we going to go about it? So that is the question. In which case the field will not be 0 at infinity. So how am I going to solve? Then I have to bring in the arguments from symmetry and come out with some another manner, some answer which is plausible. So this is very, very important. So the substance of Helmholtz theorem is, it actually tells you that in order to solve first order differential equations of the divergence and curl of a vector field, to determine uniquely the field functions, knowing their divergence and curl, okay, we also need to supply the boundary conditions. That is the most important fact from this Helmholtz theorem. Okay, so there is extensive proof, but we are not getting into that. All you must understand is Helmholtz theorem lays out the condition required for solving first order differential equations of divergence and curl associated with electric and magnetic field. Okay, to solve it uniquely to determine E and B uniquely. So this is the most important thing. Okay, so now let us comment on the potential functions and also what does it mean by curlless field? What are all the equivalent conditions? Then what does it mean by solenoidal fields? What are all the equivalent conditions? So this we'll try to understand because these facts that you are learning today will be used throughout the course when we get into electrostatics, later when we get into magnetostatics, finally when we go into time varying fields. So we are going to use these conditions what we are learning here. So the mathematics is only one part of the course, but mathematics by itself is not the course. In fact, it is not the course at all. We are taking the help of mathematics to understand the nature of electric and magnetic fields. Beyond that, we are also will be able to quantitatively determine E and B in space. So these are the stuff that we are interested in. So to get that E and B, we are doing this mathematics. So I am emphasizing that aspect every now and then so that you don't, switch off your mind that mathematics is done. This mathematics is going to be travel along with us throughout this course. So keep this aspect in mind. So as the title says, scalar potential from curlless or irrotational fields, which means the potential function associated with a vector field which has no rotation at all will be a scalar. So the potential function must be a scalar. How? So by irrotational fields, we know that the del cross F mathematically must be 0 if F represents the vector function. Okay, so here I have written E, and if that is the case everywhere, if that function whose curl vanishes everywhere, then that vector function can be represented by what is known as the gradient of a scalar potential function. So that is exactly what is written. Now don't let this minus sign to bother you. The minus sign comes precisely because when we talk about potential, we have to have a reference point. The reference point, we keep it at infinity. At infinity, we have already kept the field to be vanishing 0. So keeping that aspect in mind, we have written the negative sign because if I have to bring some charge from infinity where the potential is 0 and put it in space, I have to do work, okay, and put that charge against the existing field. I have to do the work. When we talk about energy distribution stored in a charge function, charge distribution, okay, what is the energy of a charge distribution function? Then we'll talk about this concept of the potential function. We'll exploit that the potential at infinity must be 0. After all, by now you know that potential is given by nothing but q by 4 pi epsilon naught r. When r tend to infinity, 1 by infinity will be 0. So this is the convenience, mathematical convenience we are adopting. Therefore, a reference point is completely arbitrary. Okay, so keep that aspect in mind. It is actually in all practical cases, it is potential difference that is more important rather than potential at a point. But potential at a point can be used to estimate what is the field associated, okay, at that point. And we will also come to an important problem in case of a conductor. The field inside the conductor will be 0, okay, but there will be a potential associated. So keep that aspect in mind. In fact, the spherical conductor represents a equipotential surface. Okay, so a conductor in the form of a sphere, the surface of that sphere represents equipotential. All these facts are coming from this mathematics. We'll come to that at that right appropriate time. I am only throwing some highlights here and there for you to remember that we are learning electromagnetics, not pure mathematics. So why did I say that it must be represented by gradient of potential? Because by the fact that we learned in the previous class that the curl of a gradient of a scalar function must be 0. So which means E must be represented by what is known as the gradient of a scalar function, where V0 is the scalar potential. Having said this, what are all the equivalent conditions? By equivalent conditions, what I mean is the vector function will satisfy one condition only if it satisfies all the remaining conditions. So it is not that only one condition will be satisfied, the other equivalent conditions will not be satisfied. They have to satisfy all the equivalent conditions for it to represent a irrotational field. So I am going to lay out the definitions for the equivalent conditions. What are they? So del cross E is 0, let us say. Then by implication of Stokes theorem, we can say that the closed line integral of E must be 0. That is condition 1. Okay. What about the condition 2? If you remember the gradient theorem, divergence theorem, and the curl theorem, there is a line integral on the curl theorem on the right hand side. There is a closed line integral. There is a line integral on the this one, gradient theorem. So if I interrelate this Stokes theorem to gradient theorem, my consequence can be shown as the line integral of electric field must be path independent for any two given points. Okay, so that is the implication. Now I already told you the curl of a gradient is 0. Therefore, I can actually represent the vector function by the gradient. So the negative sign, just forget about it for now. We'll come to that later. It is just a question of convenience because of the choice of the infinity being the reference point when we talk about potential. E must be gradient of some scalar function. When this we have already stated. Now, if I add a constant to this, okay, such as the k, now it becomes E will become minus del of V0 plus k by, we know that the gradient of a scalar function will be not a scalar function. Gradient of a constant is 0, which means gradient of constant is 0, which means the gradient is not affected when I add a constant to a scalar function. So let us say I have the potential function as xyz. If I add say xyz plus 5 or xyz plus 100, I am not going to affect its gradient. The E will remain the same. So therefore, I can add the constant with impunity without having to worry much. Okay. So the scalar potential is not unique. That is the most important consequence. Now, what are all the signatures for a vector function to represent a solenoidal field? By solenoidal field, we know that the divergence of that field must be 0. For example, if I have the vector function to be B, okay, I have chosen B carefully because B is going to represent magnetic field. We'll come to that. So del dot B is always, there is no spread of the field function. Okay, it always curls. So del dot B is 0. So if everywhere, then B can be represented by a curl of another vector function. Okay, so where A0 is the vector potential. Okay, so A0 is the vector potential. So here not must come. Let me write it down and put the number over here. Done. A0 is a vector potential. Okay, so we can see that by again the second derivatives, we know divergence of curl of any vector function. See, this representation comes from this fact. So B must be, if this is 0, the divergence is 0 everywhere, then del cross B, del cross C where B should be represented by curl of another vector function. So this is a mathematical way of finding. So if a given a vector function, how do I prove that it represents solenoidal field? First thing is it must be 0. The del dot B must be given vector function divergence must be 0. Okay. And then this it must be represented by the curl of another vector function. So what are the implications here are equivalent conditions. The equivalent condition means, as I told you, the given vector function will satisfy one only if it satisfies all others. So we take, let us bring the divergence theorem to the front. What does that divergence theorem say? The divergence theorem says the volume integral of divergence of a vector function, okay, is given by the closed surface integral of the vector function itself. So triple integral del dot B integrated over the volume d tau, okay, equivalent to the closed surface integral that bounds this volume. That is very important. That bounds this volume. So it will be B dot ds, which is the flux of B. So the flux of B flowing through a closed surface must be 0 for the vector function to represent a solenoidal field. So that is the first implication. Okay. So the first implication is closed. The circle represents the closed surface, and this is the flux of the vector function. If del dot B is 0, then B dot ds for any closed surface. This is by the divergence theorem. Now, if I compare, there is a divergence theorem which uses a surface integral. There is curl theorem. The left hand side of the curl theorem uses surface integral. So, trying to stitch my mind to both of divergence theorem and curl theorem, I see that it must be the case that B dot ds, okay, the surface integral of B dot ds must be independent of surface, but only dependent on the boundary line. The boundary is a line for a surface. So this surface integral of B, flux of B must be independent. Okay. So then the last one is, again, the potential function associated with B is not unique. Okay. So here we talk about the vector potential A naught. To this, if I add a gradient, which is another vector function, gradient of a scalar function, say del V or something, if I add, I am not going to affect the curl, because curl of the divergence of curl is always, sorry, I am not going to affect the divergence. The divergence of curl is always going to be 0. So I can actually, it does not affect the divergence of the vector function. Okay. So that is the main thing. So the vector function is B here. So I am adding a gradient of a scalar function, which means a gradient of a scalar function is a vector. So I have two vectors. One vector function is actually A naught, which is related to the field for solenoidal field like this, with the, okay, the curl of that vector function is representing the field. But if I add to this A naught, let us say I add A naught plus a del V component, I can easily add without having to worry about, because if I add there, I am not going to affect the del dot B. The del dot B will remain constant. So that's what exactly what I had written here. If A naught, now the new A naught becomes A naught plus del V naught. Okay. Okay. So if A naught becomes, okay, let me keep it this way. This is maybe A naught. This is fine. If I have, let us say, A, simplicity, if I have A equal to A naught plus del V naught, then I can do that. So I have altered the vector potential without disturbing the divergence of the given vector function B. So I can do that. Okay. So if I add a gradient of a scalar function, which is a vector function, and my new vector potential is A, I can write the new vector potential A without actually altering del dot B equal to 0 everywhere. So which means I am able to alter the vector potential. Thus, I can state that the vector potential is not unique. So remember, for the curleless field, the scalar potential is not unique. For the solenoidal field, the vector potential is not unique. So this is very important fact, and we are going to take use of these equivalent conditions when we talk about electrostatic potential, which is scalar, and when we talk about magnetic potential, which is vector, we are going to make use of these expressions. Okay. So I again conclude by saying that both the scalar potential associated with the electrostatic field and the vector potential associated with the magnetic field is not unique. Okay. So this is very important, are not unique. You can alter the vector potential or scalar potential without affecting the fundamental premise. What is the fundamental premise in case of solenoidal field? The fundamental signature is divergence must be 0 of that vector function, given vector function. Similarly, for curleless field, the curl of the vector function given vector function must be 0. So I can alter the vector potential functions without disturbing the fundamental concepts of a curleless field and a solenoidal field. Okay, so keep that aspect in mind. Show that the given vector function yz x hat plus zx y hat plus xy z hat can be written both as a gradient of a scalar and as the curl of a vector function. So how do I proceed? So the first question is, I got to prove that given vector function can represent the gradient of a scalar. See, if f has to represent as the gradient of scalar, then by the consequence of the second derivatives of the del operator, we know del cross del cross del v must be 0, where v is the scalar function. What is del v? That is the gradient of scalar function. What should be the gradient of scalar function? The given vector function must itself represent the gradient of scalar function. So let me repeat like this. I have been given a vector function f. I want to know whether that vector function f can represent the gradient of a scalar. So let my scalar be v. The gradient of the scalar v is del v. If f needs to equal del v, then by the consequence of the second derivatives, I must prove that del cross del v must be 0. In other words, del cross del f must be, del cross f must be 0. So again repeat, if I can represent the gradient of a scalar by this vector function, then I must prove that the curl of the gradient of the scalar function must be 0. In other words, the curl of this f must be 0. So indeed that is the case. So we can actually see that you can substitute for the this gradient you can take on this vector function. We can actually prove that this with the because this vector function is not the gradient. This vector function is a this one. Okay. So to do that, I can do this. So del cross del v must be 0. Now, for it to represent the curl of another vector function, I must again prove that the divergence of the given vector function must be 0, which is indeed the case. So this function is, as I told you, whose curl and divergence, okay, is 0, which means this vector function, okay, is not a unique representation, or the potential function associated with this vector function. I can actually compute the potential associated with these vector functions, and then I can prove that they are not unique solutions. For example, I can see that if V is, for example, XYZ here, okay, and I take the del V of that XYZ, I will get YZ X hat plus ZX Y hat plus XY Z hat, which will be my F. But alternatively, if I use, for example, XYZ plus some K, say some constant, and then I try to do that, I will still have the same issue. I can get the same vector function. So my potential function is not unique. Okay, so that is the answer that I am proving here. Same thing, I can prove that the potential function for vector functions or the vector potential function will not be unique for this case. You can solve that also. By equivalency of cross derivatives, you can actually find out that it is not going to get you to the this one unique values for the vector potential. So what is the take home message? Take home message is we identified the signatures for curl-less fields. We identified the signatures for solenoidal fields. Very important is that if you prove that if a vector given vector function is curl-less, it must represent a curl-less state, then the curl of that vector function must be proven to be 0. And secondly, that vector function can be gotten by some non-unique scalar function. Okay, because we know that the curl of gradient is always 0. Okay, so the scalar potential associated with curl-less field is a scalar quantity. The potential associated with solenoidal field is a vector quantity. Okay, by mathematical implication, we can actually prove that all these things, and I think I have said enough. If you have any doubts, you are welcome to discuss with me. Thank you.